During World War II, one man waged a secret and sinister war on behalf of the British government. His name was Sefton Delmer.
He was the king of nasty things, without any doubt, yeah.
He'd witnessed Germany unleash a new weapon, sex propaganda, and volunteered to beat the Nazis at their own game. He ran a shadowy department to print and broadcast pornography. He spread fantasies of rape, perversion, and sex to create divisions among the Germans and shatter enemy morale. To beat tyranny, Sefton Delmer built Britain a state apparatus devoted to lies, smears, and trickery. But he paid a terrible personal price.
Ein Sender der alliierten Militärregierung.
Germany calling, Germany calling, Germany calling.
At the start of World War II, the German army unleashed a sex propaganda weapon. In a campaign all but written out of the history books, British troops were subject to an entirely new form of attack, a multimedia assault of sexual smears. German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had come up with a ruse to split the British from their French allies. He decided to stir up sexual jealousy between them. In 1940, illustrated leaflets were floated over the Maginot Line for the French to read.
The basic message was quite simple. The poor Frenchman in his trenches is fighting against the German, and the English are drinking champagne with our women. Quite easy.
And the whole concept was to convince the French that while they were fighting and dying at the front, the British were having sex with their women.
What is happening to your wives back home, soldiers? The British are stationed in your villages.
The Where's Tommy leaflet is a really interesting item. It's one of the very first of the see-through leaflets. What the Germans did was basically show a French soldier in his death throes, and when that card was held up to the light, a second card had been cleverly glued behind it, making two pieces. When the light shone through, now a British soldier would be seen back with a French wife or in a French bistro or in a French whorehouse, obviously with semi-dressed young ladies, and they were very popular cards.
Sefton Delmer was a successful tabloid journalist covering the standoff in France for a British paper. When he saw the leaflets, he was intrigued. Troops would normally throw away straightforward propaganda. But Delmer saw that the leaflets with dirty pictures were kept, reread, and passed from man to man. This was a revelation to Delmer. In the years to come, he would use this principle in the service of the British and forge a media empire of leaflets, news sheets, and radio stations across Europe, of greater influence than even the BBC.
See some photos of your grandpa.
Someone who knew why Delmer was perfect for the job of taking on the Germans was his daughter, Selina. Delmer understood the Germans. He'd spent his early childhood in Germany.
There's me, same haircut as you. There's Grandpa. He was really good at telling stories. He used to tell me the most wonderful stories when I was a little girl going to school, just like I tell you. He had a perfect upbringing for the job that he did, because having been an enemy schoolboy in Germany, born in Berlin, and having gone to school in Berlin, and then after his father was interned in Germany, they were sent back to Britain, and he went to St. Paul's, yet again, another enemy schoolboy. because he had come from Germany. So he had a tremendous insight into that side of things, of being an outsider. When he was in Germany, you would have sworn he was German. When he was in Britain, he was very, very British. It made him two people in one package.
Even his marriage straddled two worlds. In 1935, Delma had married Isabel Nicholas. She was a London artist who had befriended Picasso, Giacometti, and Epstein. Isabel's beauty had inspired them to turn her image into art. Delma was a foreign correspondent in Paris when war changed their life. Isabel had helped Delma cultivate the contacts who had given him access to the Nazi elite, including Hitler himself.
He looked at me as though he was Ludendorff about to confer the Iron Cross, and then he said, "Sehr angenehm, sehr angenehm," which means pleased to meet you. Dreadful,
France still looked like an imposing castle, but Hitler's political termites have so gnawed away the binding of national unity that the castle was ready to crumble.
When France collapsed, the German propagandists could claim that their sex smears had played a part. Delma and Isabel fled to London. Germany would now turn its new weapon on Britain, and the British would have to decide whether to stay on the moral high ground or to use sex propaganda themselves. As the war moved from France to England, so Goebbels' propaganda offensive moved from frontline soldiers to civilians, softening them up before any invasion.
Calling. Germany calling. Here are the Reichs in ambush. Station Bremen and Station DXB on the 31-meter band. You are about to hear our news in English.
Let's go bombing. Oh, let's go bombing. Like United Nations airmen do.
Just as the French had been told they were fighting for the British, so the British were told they were fighting for the Jews.
Another war, another profit, another Jewish business trick.
And leaflets dropped over London carried the same crude anti-Semitic message.
A lot of dough, a lot of gold, the British Empire.
While Delma was making BBC broadcasts into Germany opposing the Nazis, Berlin was beaming back a more subversive kind of radio.
Workers' Challenge! Workers' Challenge! Workers' Challenge, calling all workers of Britain and Northern Ireland on wavelength 213 metres every night at 8:10.
A radio station calling itself Workers' Challenge declared it was British and was broadcasting from inside Britain, but was in fact German.
Workers in the army, it's not your war, it's the capitalists' war. So what will you get out of it? Nothing. All you'll get is a bullet in the head. Perhaps you'll end up with a couple of legs short. For what?
The Germans pretended to be British and pretended to be a real anti-war movement. This use of lies to trick the public won a new name: black propaganda. Delma was inspired by this dark side. This was the point that the government set up a new unit called the Political Warfare Executive. They turned to Delma to run its top-secret mission: Britain's own black propaganda offensive. Elik Howe would become a key member of Delma's unit.
First of all, they wanted to achieve something that His Majesty's government could immediately disavow. The whole essence of black was that HM government could deny that it even existed.
In May 1941, Delma began broadcasting from a requisitioned house in Bedfordshire. His wife Isabel would be recruited to illustrate leaflets. To smear the Germans as sex tourists, images of troops with prostitutes were faked to look like postcards sent home from conquered France. But Delma wanted to combine the new weapons of sex and black deception. To do so, he turned to radio.
I think we should try a new type of black radio. One that undermines Hitler, not by opposing him, but by pretending to be all for him and his war. Hitler once said to me, "There is an inner pig dog in every man." We must appeal to the inner pig in every German.
Achtung, Achtung, Ihr Gustav Siegfried I. Ihr Gustav Siegfried I. Es spricht der Chef.
Dass unsere Propagandaidioten die Situation nördlich von Kirkuk
is retreating. It is no reason for those at home to go and shit their trousers.
The voice of Delmer's propaganda was a young German émigré, Paul Saunders. He was to play a fictitious German officer, known only as Der Chef, a loyal and patriotic supporter of Hitler and the war, but hostile to the SS.
To a man, start charging for his head. They should have their backsides torn open as wide as they open their mouths. So much for the Eastern Front. The shit that stinks to high heaven, the real shit, is that we are not only to cope with the Bolsheviks in the front line, but to cope with the bastard Bolsheviks at home inside the government.
Delmer borrowed the coarse language of Workers' Challenge to titillate his audience, then went further. He used sex stories to keep his listeners hooked.
We wrote and rendered real pornographic pieces.